let's say Avraham Avinu said like this. Of course, God created the world. That goes without saying. He's the creator. Why did he create the world? As an experiment. He wanted to see what would happen. And however it goes, that's fine. But when a scientist does an experiment, if he's a real scientist, if he's really committed to truth, he has no desire one way or the other for the outcome of the experiment. He's coming to learn the truth about nature. So whichever way the experiment turns out, he's closer to his goal. So let's say God created the world for the same reason. It's an experiment. He wants to see what's going to happen. If I create a world in which there are intelligent beings who can exercise free will, what's going to happen? Will the world develop in a positive way? Will it develop in a negative way? Let's see. Let's see. Now, again, it's a little hard to imagine that should have been God's motivation, because of course God has perfect foreknowledge. God should be able to figure out what will happen without doing the experiment, but humor me for a moment. Let's say that was God's intention. So therefore God doesn't really care which way it turns out. If the world becomes refined and excellent, that's fine. If it becomes corrupt and degenerate, that's also fine. It's an experiment. He wants to see what's going to happen. Well, Avraham Avinu thought that through, and it came to the conclusion that makes no sense. That can't be. It must be there's a purpose, there's an objective. And if the world is declining, if the world is becoming corrupted, that objective is not being fulfilled. And therefore now there's a kasha, there's a problem. Why doesn't God intervene? God says, well, now that you realize this, now I can intervene. How am I intervening? I'm intervening by giving you the mission of Lech Lecha. We've said often the amazing interpretation of the Ramban. I think we mentioned it last week, but a lot of people weren't here. That the Ramban says that originally, when God first created the world, plan A was that there should not be any distinction between groups of humanity. All human beings should be equal before God. That all mankind, all the descendants of Adam and Eve, should have a relationship with God, should serve God, should acknowledge God, etc. And there'd be no chosen people, no group that was chosen from among the rest of the human race. When the human race failed at various junctures, it failed in the Garden of Eden, it failed at the time of the flood, it failed in the Tower of Babel episode. At that point, God activated Plan B. Plan B was to select a subset of the human race, a group, a chosen people, which would bring truth and virtue to all mankind. That, of course, was Avraham Avinu. That was the selection. And this is God's addressing the problem. Right? The world is not going to save itself. It's going to save itself only through the agency of this very, very special group of people, this very special individual, Avraham Avinu. That's Lech Lecha. That's Lech Lecha. Why did God choose Avraham? You know, it's very important to know that there are two different aspects to Avraham. There is Avraham's understanding, as the Midrashim tell us, that he came to understand, to acknowledge God's existence at a very young age. There's also Avraham's personality. And probably the most prominent feature of Avraham's personality is his commitment to truth, his willingness to sacrifice, to put himself at risk for the sake of truth, which is not the same thing as his knowledge. You know, there are many people that know things but aren't willing to live up to the truth, aren't willing to sacrifice for an ideal. And there's something more beyond that in Avraham's personality. Avraham's personality is not just a willingness to lay his life on the line for an ideal, but there is a perfect trust, a perfect faith in God, a reliance in God, an acceptance of God's will. There's never a complaint. There's never a suspicion. There's never a hewer. There's never a doubt. It's also part of the personality of Avraham Avinu. You know, we are his descendants. And we read the stories of Avraham Avinu because he's meant to be a role model for us. In what way? So I would argue as follows. Number one, he's not our role model in his acquisition of faith. Because we have our own sources of truth. Because our source of truth is rooted in the revelation of Mount Sinai, the unbroken chain of tradition from that point onward. That's how we know the truth of God's existence, of the divinity of Torah, etc. Now, the tradition of Avraham Avinu was severed. That chain of tradition was broken in Egypt. Chazal tell us that by the time the Jews were enslaved in Egypt, they had degenerated to the point where halalu avdei avodah zarah, halalu avdei avodah zarah, the Egyptians were idolaters, the Jews were idolaters. So our faith doesn't come from Avraham Avinu. Avraham's willingness to die is really not the source of our willingness to die. We do not die for the truth. You know that. Jews do not sacrifice for the truth. We would not give up our lives for the truth. We give up our lives at God's command. We would not give our lives up for an idea. If the Torah would not have told us, that you should love God with your life, we would not sacrifice our lives for the ideal of monotheism. So we sacrifice our lives because God commanded us to sacrifice our lives. It is a consequence of revelation. In the absence of revelation, we don't believe that one should give up his life. If God tells you to give up your life, you give up your life. If God does not tell you to give up your life, you don't give up your life. The Rambam says that if a person gives up his life in situations where the halacha does not demand it, that is tantamount to suicide. Why Avraham Avinu was willing to give up his life in the absence of a divine command is somewhat of a mystery. I don't have a good answer to that question. I don't understand. It was Nimrod threatened him. I mean, why in the world should Avraham Avinu lay his life on the line for an idea? It's his obligation that all mankind should come to the truth. Again, God has not yet revealed himself to Avraham. Avraham has come to a knowledge of God on his own. That calls for the ultimate sacrifice. That's a mystery to me. But the halacha certainly is not that way. The halacha certainly does not demand that type of sacrifice. If the Torah says you have to give up your life, you have to give up your life. That's God's command. If God has not commanded you, then to the contrary, it's tantamount to suicide to give up your life for an idea. For an ideal. So therefore, really, we don't learn much from Avraham's early history. It's not his brilliant theological insight. It's not his willingness to die for his beliefs. Avraham Avinu is a role model because he had perfect faith in God, that even when God promised him the world and things didn't seem to turn out as he was promised, he kept his faith. Because Avraham's beginnings as a role model were at the point of Lech Lecha. The earlier history is very interesting. Or certainly it's very appropriate that we should think that our patriarch was a great person. So the Midrashim give us the background. So from the Midrashim we know, yes, Avraham was a great person, not only from the time he was 75. He was a great person from the time that he was 3 years old, or even 40 years old. But the Torah is not writing these Parshias simply to tell us what a great person Avraham Avinu was. The Torah is writing these Parshias because we are meant to learn how we are to follow in his ways. And what we're meant to learn about Avraham Avinu only begins with the Lech Lecha. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu appeared to Avraham at the age of 75 and told him that go forth and I will make you into a great nation and I will bless you and you'll be successful and prosperous. And then he does go forward and everything seems to fail. And there's a famine and he has to go to Egypt and there his wife is taken and he suffers so many indignities. And yet he keeps his faith and his trust in God. That is what we're meant to learn, and those are the episodes that the Torah records about Avraham Avinu. So again, it's not that Avraham Avinu's religious philosophy is the basis of our belief. Again, the basis of our belief is the revelation of Sinai. It's not Avraham's sacrifice for the truth that inspires us, because to the contrary, our halakha doesn't even call for such sacrifice, doesn't even permit such sacrifice. What Avraham Avinu's heter was, I don't know. But the fact that Avraham Avinu maintained perfect faith and trust in God, and he withstood 10 trials, 10 tests, that is what the Torah wants to tell us about Avraham Avinu. Now I would even go farther than that. You know, going back to Noach, the Torah tells us why God called upon Noach. Now God had to pick one person to save the world, right? The whole world was going to be drowned. God wanted to save the world with some group, some small family. So he calls on Noach. So you're going to ask the question, why Noach? Well, the answer is because Noach was already a tzaddik. Why did God call Avram? There's a very interesting thing about God. Human beings, they can only evaluate a candidate on the basis of his past performance. You say I squeezed a little bit of politics in, even at this point. Only on the basis of his past performance. Whereas we can't see the future. We don't know what the person is going to do. Whereas if a person says it's true that Barack Obama has no record, but I believe that in the future he's going to do X, Y, and Z, and accordingly I'm going to vote for him, I'm going to put my trust in him, it's foolhardy. You really can only judge a person on the basis of his past. But that's only true for us as human beings. Because God knows what a person will do. And therefore, God chose Avram not because of what Avram had already done. Those are very great things that he did. That's not why God chose Avram. God chose Avram because he knew what Avram will do in the future. Precisely because he had that character trait of trust